The man who never had his fill. It was a cold and snowy eve. Certainly no night for a man without a home to be walking these grey and endless streets. Inside the pizza parlour, George Reed spun a lively tune on his harmonica. The local children giggled and pointed excitedly at the harmonica man as their parents glowed with approval. His reward would be all the pizza he could eat, 6 pies at least, and a warm bed in one of these folks' homes. He knew they were good for it. But when he tucked in for the night, George had not had his fill. As the years and calories stacked up, most men would have got older and fatter. Yet for all he consumed, George only got thinner as he washed from town to town. Tapeworm. Tonight he plied his trade with some grannies and orderlies in a nursing home. Hoo-ah! His harmonica filled the room with joy. After devouring 3 helpings of pork chops and mashed potatoes, he eyed the plate of the old woman next to him. Juice dribbled down his chin. "Go ahead, Georgie," she said. "You're such a good boy. You shouldn't have to starve." But George had not had his fill. Early the next morning, he was already on the freeway with his thumb in the air. "Where are you headed?" said the man in the truck. "Nowhere," said George. "Anywhere." It was a new decade, and tonight George played to an all but empty bar in the city. He had lost a lot of weight. Afterwards, the only woman in the joint took the stool next to him and asked him his name. The bartender leaned over the counter. "You don't know this guy, Mary. George is famous, been all over the tri-state area." With a wink, he added, "Man's insatiable." And that night, George proved it as he buried his face in Mary's beaver. "Holy woodland creatures! Attaboy, George! Attaboy, George!" "Play that harmonica," she purred. But even after 5 trips to heaven and back, he had not had his fill. The morning after was an awkward affair as they stared at each other over coffee. One wanted to feel more, the other just wanted to feel. In his final days, George was all skin and bones. I can relate, except for the skin part. His last meal had been a mistake. It was on a sidewalk one night in a small suburban town that he came across the boy. Hungrily, and with an agonized grimace, he opened his mouth to beg for help. Out came a cacophony of wheezes and toots, but the boy understood.
"Wait, you mean Jorge ate his harmonica?"
Once he was alone, George Reed looked at the candy bar he held in one hand and began to cry. They found George's half-eaten body in a market next town over. In one hand he held a knife, in the other a fork. Chunks of flesh had been torn from his chest and his arms. Blood framed an eerie smile. The wind that morning blew fierce, and as it whistled through the hole he'd carved out of his own neck, the harmonica man played his last song in this world. There were Gawkers, and many knew him. They shared stories of how he'd filled them with hope, filled them with life. They, at least, had had their fill. Especially Mary. The end.
The Legend of the Stinky Crow. Call, call. For nearly 14 years, his mind had been soaring miles above. But Elliot Thomas was still stuck down on Earth in the boring town of Sinchester.
Sinster.
What?
It's pronounced Sinster.
How do you know?
My cousin's from Sinster. Never mind, keep going.
Alone in his treehouse, he glued feathers to his wingsuit, readying himself for the day he would join the Phoenixes and Quetzalcoatlus in the sky. "Dinner time," cried his mother from their house across the yard. Elliot sat at the center of the table. A TV dinner was challenging his BO as the dominant smell in the room. On his left, his mother yammered about her day at the ER. On his right, his father was absorbed in his smartphone. As for Elliot, his eyes were fixed on the ceiling fan, the most fascinating personality within a 10-foot radius. In homeroom the next day, Justin Schmakovsky threw a crappy paper airplane at him. Within seconds, Elliot had built a superior vessel. He stood up on his chair and swiftly launched the Papierflieger. What? At his unsuspecting enemy.
Go, Papierflieger, go!
Zoom, splort. The marvel of paper aviation lodged itself in Justin's tender eyeball. Mr. Thomas, bellowed their teacher. Go to the principal's office. Later that day, Elliot was cooing quietly to himself as he bought a candy bar in the lobby. Casey Witchtits was smoking nearby and sneered at him. "You'll never fly, stinky crow," she laughed. "Why don't you go jack off to some bird porn? I bet you do more fapping than flapping."
Hey, that's pretty good.
"Fuck you!" screeched Elliot as he ran for the door. It was dark out by the time Elliot meandered home. On the sidewalk, he passed a gaunt man who stared at him intently, desperately even.
Uh-oh, stranger danger.
The man opened his mouth and said, "Uviwa, uviza." What the fuck? Elliot had planned to eat his candy bar tonight while he finished his masterpiece, but he instead held it out to the man. "I know what you mean," he replied. The schoolyard was packed the next morning as Elliot's classmates waited for first bell. "Go, go!" As one, the students turned toward the gate and saw Elliot dressed head to toe in his wingsuit. After a moment of shock, they burst into laughter. But they were already far below him. He swooped through their midst and into the school. "Go, go!" He bounded through the halls, zigzagged up the stairwell. "Go!" The school let out a collective gasp when they saw a stinky crow on the roof. With a triumphant snap, he spread his wings, and a moment later, he had leapt. The next 2 seconds were the most beautiful of Elliot's entire life. He could feel their eyes upon him. He was flying, and their awe was keeping him aloft. 10 minutes later, as guidance counselors wiped bits of Elliot off sobbing students, and the police struggled to piece together the story you are reading now, Elliot's teacher looked down at the wreckage of the boy on the pavement and never forgot what he saw. One bloody hand had formed a peace sign. The other was giving him the finger. It's like an Alanis Morissette song. The end.
Okay, lovely. I don't think I'll sleep for weeks.
Quidad cojones.
Psychopomp and Circumstance. It was her turn to fetch the water, and Maris Grimm was determined to be done with it as soon as possible. Bucket in hand, she made her way down to the well by the wheat field. She and her 2 elder sisters were all beautiful, but on this windy day, Maris outshone them all. She was in love. Whoosh! The wheat bowed a greeting as the breeze caught it. "And a good day to you," Maris giggled as her nipples responded to the weather and thoughts of her lover. My word, what is this storybook rated? She wound a pail of water to the top of the well, but no sooner had she grabbed the rope than she felt a sharp tug, lost her balance, and went tumbling into the gloom head first. "Mother fudge! Mother fudge!" cried Maris. An hour later, the sun sat lower in the sky as 2 figures approached the well. One was Maris's older sister, Colleen, and she was very concerned. The other was their faithful collie, Ow Ow. "Help me!" cried Maris from the bottom of the well. But as Colleen grabbed the rope to pull her sister up, she too was yanked into the darkness below. Well, that sucks. "Ow Ow! Go get help, boy!" cried Colleen. "Oof!" woofed Ow Ow in response. But because he was a stupid collie, he instead grabbed the loose end of the rope and began to tug valiantly. Crack-a-boom! Boom! Boom! Suddenly, a freak bolt of lightning lanced down from the sky and hit poor Ow Ow, causing the pooch to explode in a crimson blossom of slippery Ow Ow giblets. Poor, stupid Ow Ow. Stupid is right. My pet was smarter.
Shh! Keep breathing.
It was well after dark, and Maris and Colleen had all but given up hope when their eldest and wisest sister, Giltine, arrived on the scene. "Where are you, sister?" was all she managed to utter ere she slipped on Ow Ow's unctuous leftovers and fell down, down, down into the wicked well. Plonkety rascal rabbitness. And with that, the sisters Grimm vanished from the world for 7 full years. When they returned, they served a new master who had been smitten by their beauty. Though that beauty faded, his gift to them was theirs forever. The power to end lives as abruptly as fate had ended their own. The end. I was hoping we'd find out why they all sound like men. Beauty is blind. Brava! Bravissima! A tidal wave of applause washed over Justine as roses rained down on the stage. It's a wonder they don't hit me, she thought bitterly. I'm the largest target for miles. After curtain down, she retired to her dressing room, set her horned Viking helmet aside, and waddled up to the mirror with a gelatinous jiggle. There was a knock at the door, and Henry Wallin appeared. Henry again. Cheers, Louise. You were magnificent, Miss D'Evangelo. Did you see? The papers are calling you the finest soprano of the 19th century. He looked at the floor and shifted his feet uncomfortably. Every man in town loves you. Stupid Henry, moaned Justine as she examined her profile in the mirror. No real man could love a fat twat like me. She tried adjusting her midriff. Disgusting. She waited for the sigh, but today Henry's response was different. There was a rustle, a metallic thunk. Good evening to you, my lady. She heard the clack of the door. Justine gazed wistfully at the tintype of beautiful Bella Margot, the slender soprano she idolized in her youth. What was Bella's secret, she wondered, as she picked away at a box of truffles on the table.
What indeed?
A few minutes later, Justine was bent over the wastebasket by the door, gagging and heaving. Eventually, she gave up and removed her finger from her throat. Then, at the bottom of the wastebasket, she saw the roses and the letter, and remembered the rustle and the thunk. She opened the letter and read aloud. You have won my heart, and that is no small feat. Oh, how sweet! No small feat! She shouted in rage. A large feat, is that it? She crumpled up the note, threw it on the floor, and stomped on it for good measure. Something inside of her had snapped. From that moment forward, she was determined to never sing again. Her voice could go to hell, just as long as she could be beautiful. No one knows exactly what happened to Justine after that. Not the impresario who had begged her to come back, not the reporters who had begged her to comment, not Henry, who had been too crushed to face her again. Correct me if I'm wrong, G, but didn't Henry want to be crushed? I mean, come on. Chubby chaser, anyone? When Justine's landlord finally let himself in, he was startled to discover a slim and beautiful woman in his tenant's armchair. She was naked, and her throat had been savaged. The blood had painted an inverse bouquet of roses on her chest. The woman held her own vocal cords in her hands. Oh, the end.